Okay. Mr. Ostrovskiy,
Hey,
Hello, hello.
hey,
how are you
Andre.
doing tonight?
Wow, that is something fantastic, you know.
All
Can you
right.
hear me, by the way?
Yeah,
Yes,
we
I
can hear you.
can. So tell
That's
us about your experience tonight, and maybe you bring up your good game that you played. That was
well, actually, it was not clear whether it was the night or the early morning, as
oh for
usual.
yeah. Where are you from
Well,
or
right
playing from?
away, I'm in Germany, so
Okay.
in Central Europe time.
So it's like
Okay.
So actually,
it's like
I,
6:30
I
there now, right?
yeah, at the moment,
I see.
exactly 6:30. But when
Oh.
I started playing, it was 3:20, so it's quite hard. Was quite hard. But again, I'm
Waking up to the chess match, huh?
and that's exactly the thing. So, all
I see.
right. So it was quite hard. I was quite nervous, especially at the very beginning, because I understood it should be probably the most important match in the whole league for our team.
Uh-huh.
But somehow the very first game went not that bad for me. It was very important. I actually didn't prepare for Naroditsky and Mamedyarov a lot because I understood these guys can play anything. So
Yeah.
I actually wanted to do my best against their third and fourth boards. But well, the things went not according to the plan, which was quite good.
Yes.
Yeah,
I saw
yeah.
that. Yeah, you were mowing them down. Yes.
Yeah. So the result was quite shocking,
No,
especially for me. You know,
no,
it was my first very first super top grandmaster scalp. So
Oh,
yeah, yeah.
nice. Well, congratulations
We
on
were
that.
joking around. We are calling Mamedyarov Big Mama,
Yeah.
and then after you won,
You got
we
demoted to
changed the name to
Mamacita.
Mamacita,
Yeah.
Little Mama.
Yeah, that was great. Okay, so do you want to bring up your game? Can we? Do you know how to do the invite and all that to the analysis board?
uh, I can probably share my screen if that is all right.
Yes, let's do that. Does that
Okay.
work, Ryan?
Yeah, it'll still show.
Okay, great.
It'll just be like two chessboards here. Let me see.
Okay. Oh, that's nice. Okay.
So do you have my screen now?
Yes.
Yeah, we can see ourselves too.
Yes. Excellent.
Okay, great. So we're talking about this great game against Mamedyarov, right?
Yes.
I guess that is exactly what people are interested in. So
I think so. Yes.
yeah.
We want to see your shine here. You know.
All right. So e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6. As I said, I didn't prepare anything against him, so I expected everything. And he played Italian game, which was probably great because I have amazing score with black in Italian. So before that game, I've already managed to beat two grandmasters in classic chess. So Grandmaster Dick from Romania and Grandmaster Vocaturo from Italy. So, well, I was pretty confident that the things will go more or less smooth. So I played Bishop c5, c3, knight f6. He played d3, this slow Italian.
Yes.
And a6, in my opinion, great move. Well, in fact, it's a well-known theory. Since white doesn't occupy the center with pawns aggressively, I have some time
Yes.
to prepare bishop a7, to prevent b4, b5, and so forth.
Yes.
So he castles, I play d6. Again, it's just a well-known theory, so d4 doesn't give white anything because I have a counterplay against f2 pawn. So for example, if d4, I just go away with the bishop. Let's say d takes c5, and here I take with the knight. And after knight e5, d takes c5, let's say queen takes, king takes, bishop takes f7. I have very unpleasant rook to f8 move to start with. Then I take this e4 pawn, and I have the attack against f2. So I have a perfect endgame. Maybe I can take on e4 immediately, so it doesn't really matter. So here white has nothing. That's why white usually delays this d4 and plays something else. And the move that he played is one of the most popular choices here. So a4, just grabbing the space on the queen side, preparing b4 with probably b5 and so forth. So here I usually start with the h6. In my opinion, very useful move because I cover g5 squares to prevent bishop to g5 move. Well, basically what I'm doing with this h6, I'm preparing castling because if, for example, I castle right away here, then bishop g5 may be not very pleasant to mate because, as you can see, I already have the pawn on d6.
Yeah.
So my bishop can't go back to e7, and it will be quite hard for me to actually deal with this queen. So that's why h6 first. And why, for example, it is not very dangerous that white can play bishop g5 here, because when I'm not castled, I can play h6 and g5. So attacking bishop. When I'm already castled, of course, h6 and g5 will be just a suicide. So that's why h6 here, preparing castling. Still d4 is nothing. So rook to e1 now castles. Again, d4 is possible here, but I already protect my queen with the king. With the rook. So my king is not deflected. So f7 is protected. So h3 also useful move, covering g4 square. And here I decided to play bishop a7, just going away from this potentially not very pleasant things like b4, like d4. So when white has the pawn on c3, of course, they are obvious choices to grab the space with the tempo. So now if white grabs the space, at least it happens without winning the tempo. That's the thing. So he played knight to d2. And, well, in general, in this pawn structure, I prefer this simple and, in my opinion, very efficient move, bishop to e6, because I'm dealing with this so-called Spanish bishop. So although it is Italian game, but it's still a Spanish bishop, classic one. So potentially most annoying, most aggressive piece in the position, and in my opinion, it's very logical to try to exchange it, right?
Yeah, so neutralize it, yes.
Of course, yeah. So b4. White continues with his plan of grabbing the space. I played rook to e8. So after this move, I'm more or less ready to play d5 because my rook already protects c5 pawn. Bishop takes e6. Usually, of course, if white takes on e6, you consider taking with the pawn. But if you have the rook already on e8, it will be quite stupid to take with the pawn because the rook then has to spend the tempo to come back to f8, a much more natural position when you have the pawn on e6, right, to attack f2 and so forth. That's why in this situation, I just take with the rook. And basically what we have here, I already had in a classic game against Bogdan Dik, the grandmaster from Romania, well, several months ago. So this plan at that time was kind of something new to me. So I was solving these problems over the board, trying to figure it out what to do with black. So the point behind queen c2 that white doesn't want to play d4 anymore, but instead he wants to play quite aggressively here, something like a5, c4, maybe b5, maybe c5, so it depends. And what I understood in that game against Dik is that actually the best strategy for black is to avoid additional weakening of the position on the queen side, in which case it will be quite hard for white to achieve anything. So the less weaknesses you have there, the better. That's the idea. Well, the idea behind rook e8 is basically to prepare this knight e7 maneuver that I played just next move. Because with the rook on e6, we can notice that after knight to e7, well, the rook will be somewhat misplaced. So it may lead to something like d4, which may be potentially not very pleasant. That's why I wanted to actually come up with the much more harmonious setup. That's why rook e8. So rook is not really needed on e6. That's the point. So knight to f1, continuing with the plan. I played knight to e7. I don't remember what my opponent in that classic game played actually in this position. Maybe it was a slightly different position, but definitely he didn't play d4, so he based all his play on this c4 plan with the idea of c5, and I was doing well. At some point I just came up with a counterplay and won the game eventually. So I was quite confident about meeting this c4. So for example, if white plays something like c4, I can even just ignore it. So I can play knight to g6. So my play is on the king side now. I'm going to try something like knight to h5, maybe with the idea of knight to f4 maneuver, just exerting some pressure on these pawns, maybe adding queen to d7 or something like that. And if white plays something like c5 here, okay, I can wait a bit. I can consider something like, for example, rook to c8 move. Then maybe even if it is necessary to play something like c6. And, well, the worst case for black is that the bishop is somewhat imprisoned here at first glance. But after this moves, rook c8 and c6, I can bring my bishop to b8. And, well, it comes to play gradually. So it's not very dangerous. That's what I mean. Basically, if white plays c5 immediately here, I can consider also something like a5, undermining this b4 pawn, and well, there are some problems with the c5. That's the thing. So, as we may notice here, somehow black managed to come up with much better development. So at the moment, I have almost all the pieces developed. So it's clear that well, something super aggressive
went
here.
wrong, yeah.
So it shouldn't work. It should work simply. So white needs much better development to create some serious threats. So to knight e7, he played d4. Again, I just continued in the same fashion. So I played knight to g6, ignoring everything and just overprotecting my e5 pawn and waiting. So now we can notice that I exert some pressure on e4 pawn, and it's not that simple for him to play, for instance, something like bishop to e3. So in that case, I can consider even capture on d4, so I'm fine there. Probably, well, he should have played something like knight to g3. I don't know. I expected knight to g3, in fact. Continuing with the plan, maybe intending to occupy a 5 square. But in any case, I think black's further play is quite simple. Much easier to find good moves for black here than for white. So I just play queen to d7, let's say, another rook to d8 with the complete centralization, after which I can think of occupying a 4 square and so on. So I'm basically just waiting for white's play because white is here in the position to define the pawn structure and so forth. And depending on the pawn structure, I will actually tweak my plans and so on. So he played d5 immediately, grabbing the space, again, continuing with this super aggressive play on the queen side. But if compared to classic pawn chain, which arises, for example, in King's Indian defense, right? This e5, d6 against d5, e4, we can notice some great advantages for black. So first of all, the bishop is not on g7, being limited with all pawns, but on a7, exerting some pressure on f2. And this is a big difference, in fact. And also, well, a subtle thing, but a very important one, in my opinion, is how white's pawns are placed here. So instead of having, for example, the pawn on c4 and, for instance, this one on a3, which would be just natural for this plan of c4, c5. White has this pawn on a4 already, which means that once white plays something like c4 here, I can do something like a5, breaking white's pawns here and basically getting this very important c5 square for my pieces. So it is quite hard for white, I mean, to achieve anything quickly. So white definitely has to spend the time on playing a5 here first, which actually happened in the game, and only then c4. So after d5, I played queen to d7. It was also a very simple move for me because I already knew that, well, it is the perfect square for a queen, controlling situation on both flanks. And he played a5. And here, again, I consider it something like knight to h5. So I think I spent some time on calculating the things after knight h5 and knight to f4. But then, at some point, I just realized, again, that I'm much better developed, right? And if, well, I open up a position, there is a chance to achieve something. That's why I played c6 here, because after c6, well, I forced the matters. And feels like if white wants to achieve anything here, he has to take risks, which actually happened. So after c6, of course, if he takes, let's say, I wanted to take with the queen, already exerting additional pressure on e4. intending to attack c3 with a very simple move, rook to c8. And once again, since I'm better developed, I'm ready to play d5 at almost any moment with a great play. I mean, it's like a much improved neither of pawn structure here. So bishop is already active and so forth. So he played c4. I took on d5, just continuing with the plan of opening the position. And he captured with the e-pawn, which I found, quite interesting for me, quite promising at very least. The thing is, if he takes with the c-pawn, at very first glance, he has a better pawn structure. But since I'm much better developed, I think I'm completely all right here. So I can play rook to c8, attacking the queen, say queen goes to d3 or something. And I can even continue with a very simple play like rook to c7. And if bishop e3, I can take. Then knight takes, let's say, I can consider knight f4 already, so queen is a bit awkward because of this e4 pawn. I can also just play rook to c8, completely occupying the c file, and I think black is by no means worse. So he took with the pawn e4, and I realized, wow, now I have some tempi, now I have some targets, so not only this c4 weak, but also d5 is vulnerable after this simple rook to c8 move, so d5 is hanging. Again, here I expected something like bishop to e3, in fact. So after bishop e3, he attacks my bishop. And if I take the bishop, he takes with the knight, protecting both c4 and d5. And here I thought I would play something like knight to f4 with a more or less balanced position. Again, attacking this one, exerting some pressure on king's side. So I think he didn't like this position. That's why he tried something different. So he played queen to b3. Just going away from this c file, there is no longer this knight e5 possibility and so forth. And here I thought of just, what to do, right? So it's a critical moment. I already completed the development. Now it's time to come up with a more or less concrete plan. My first intention was just to play knight to h5, continue with this knight to f4, and so on. But I had a feeling that something is somehow wrong with why it's set up here, because, well, again, I'm just ahead in the sense of development, and this means I have to be much more aggressive than just maneuvering my pieces. And I calculated an interesting line, exactly what I played. So I played e4, attacking the knight. Here I realized that he has some problems with the c4 pawn, so in some lines I can consider knight to e5 next move, just get into d3 square and attack in c4. So I was pretty much sure that he would play this knight to d2 move, protecting c4 at least, and at the same time attacking my e4. And here I played knight to f4, exactly what I calculated, with several ideas. So the one is just to play knight to d3, attacking the rook, attacking f2, and so on. And another one is exactly what happened in the game, so bring the queen to the action. But what is interesting, of course, I consider bishop b2 as the main move here. What is interesting here, my initial calculation was based on this line. So if queen goes to f5, let's say bishop takes f6, queen takes f6, and I thought, okay, he can't really take on e4 because I control a1 square. So he takes on e4 with the knight. I have this rook takes e4, rook e4, and queen takes a1. And somehow I stopped calculating here, and only then I realized that, okay, knight on f4 is hanging, so he can take on f4, in fact, having the extra pawn. So then I realized that in this line I have this intermediate capture on h3, but then queen takes on h3, attacking my rook on c8. So this line doesn't work, simply doesn't work. But then, when I already played queen to f5, I was quite lucky, by the way, in this game. I also realized that queen f5 is a super strong move because I create this threat of taking on f2 in many lines. So for example, if he takes on f6, I can consider various jumps with the knight already. So knight to h3 is very tempting. For example, with the following lines, so like takes with the queen, takes f2, only move king to h2, otherwise it is a checkmate. And here, for example, my queen can get to g1, then bishop to f2, and, well, I didn't actually find a checkmate there, but, well, it looks promising. But then I realized that taking on f2 immediately is even better. So after that, king takes f2, I have this line, at very least, that is what I calculated, knight to d3, double check. Now, if king goes to g3, it is just a checkmate immediately. And this means he has to choose between king e2 or king to g1. So I thought if he plays king to g1, at very least I have queen f2, king somewhere, it doesn't really matter where. I take on e1 with the tempo, attacking this one. The bishop is still hanging here. So at very least I would have some play. So after queen g3, let's say, I have queen takes g3, knight takes g3, and then something like knight to c2, attacking the rook, rook c1, e3. That is something that I saw during the game, but I wasn't sure what is the evaluation here, but black shouldn't be worse at least. So at very least I can grab the pawn on b4. I have a lot of pawns here for and the rook against two minor pieces, so it should be nice. Yeah. Maybe I missed something more straightforward here, but bishop f2 looks super dangerous. That's probably he played knight to e3, but I understood when playing queen f5 that knight e3 wouldn't be great because of this queen to g6 move. Because now I have two threats, just to take on e3 and with a checkmate, or to take on h3. And he basically doesn't have a good defense. That is probably what he missed, so he probably just blundered, because, well, I'm not forced to take on f6 with the queen when he takes with the bishop. So I'm not sure if there is a defense. Well, I thought that already here he's somewhat forced to lose at least a pawn after, say, knight to f1, something ugly like this, protecting the knight e3. So, okay, I can take on h3, then probably on f2, and so on. So it's a winning position for black. Maybe g3, but, well, it's clear that black is already dominating the board. Okay, so he took on f6, now I took on e3, and it's lost. Because he has so many hanging things here, so knight on d2, checkmate on g2, pawn on h3, and still this bishop on f6. Yeah. So I was super lucky. Probably after queen f5 it was still playable. After, say, taking on f6, probably. I'm not sure still, so it requires additional analysis. Maybe you saw something with engines, but well.
No, I think this. Yeah, I didn't see anything. Once you got that.
We saw we saw a solid black line on the evaluation, so we knew you were up.
Once you got that queen to f5 with the knight on f4, really strong. Yeah.
There was also an interesting line like queen to g3 that I also considered just protecting everything here. But now I had something like knight to h5, attacking the queen, and the queen is somewhat pinned to f2, right? Yeah. So queen to h4 should be played, and now I played just g5. And the only move is something like g4, where after I just occupy this f4 square with my queen, and this guy is just trapped. So it's also interesting. So I think basically my opponent somehow missed my counterplay here in the center, so he probably underestimated my development at this point when he played queen to b3, because I think after queen to b3 we're talking about black's advantage, at least black's initiative. Yeah. So after e4 I think black has very good position. So most likely it was better for him to take on d5 even with the pawn c4. I don't know, maybe to try this bishop to e3 after this rook to c8. So I mean this line e4, rook c8, and bishop to e3. But probably he wanted more, and somehow evaluated the position not correctly. Okay, so he played just over ambitious chess, and luckily was punished.
Yeah. Well, great.
I was really happy. I was really happy to contribute to my team, and
to be such a strong player.
It's always a great pleasure to play for you guys. So. It's something special. It's something special.
Well, I appreciate your outstanding play, and
thank you.
Congratulations on your scalp of such a strong player as Mamedyarov.
Yeah.
Wow. Beautiful.
Yeah.
Game.
Hopefully it will be just a turning point in my career. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, great.
That's what we're hoping for too.
Yes. Beautiful game.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, guys.
Congratulations.
All right, Andrey.
Well, take care, and good luck next week. Hopefully,
thank you very much.
Won't be 3 in the morning.